Thanks to the admin team at PHABC for supporting us in this webinar series. Cheryl and Christina. My name is Shannon Turner. I'm the Executive Director of the Public Health Association of BC. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm very gratefully joining you from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen, that is the Songhees and Esquimalt peoples. I think I'd like to invite you all to put your territorial acknowledgements into the chat. We're really excited about today's conversation for a variety of reasons, but one of the most important, I think, to share with you is the voice of the leadership that we have in this space, and in the form of Trevor Hancock. And Trevor, I've known for over 40 years. He was a father of the Healthy Cities movement. He's been groundbreaking service to core functions in public health related to the environment and planetary health. He's published extensively. He's a columnist for our local newspaper, and on and on and on. And he's supposedly retired, but as you can see, he's working harder than ever. He's been a very deep ally of the Public Health Association of BC for a number of years. He's the co-chair of our Wellbeing Society webinar series with Lindsay McLaren, who's also, I think, an honorary member of PHABC. And Lindsay works and lives in Alberta, but keeps faith with us in our progress towards improving conditions both for the planet and for people. The importance of Wellbeing Society can't be overstressed. It's about the interdependence between the natural world and humanity. And when I say the natural world, I really mean our non-human relations, the trees, the plants, the rocks, the water, the creatures that we share this space with. We have been quite blind to the needs of the earth in the last 40 years in particular. And I think that people like Trevor and our colleagues that are speaking with him today are helping to carry the banner forward. So there will be a planet to inhabit in a few generations. We are at a critical point, and I don't want to be alarmist at the beginning of this conversation, but we have to look reality in the eyes. And that's one of the reasons we've been so committed to undertaking this work and supporting the work on Planetary Health and Wellbeing Society. So we have a number of partners in that space, and I know many of you are on the call today. Thank you so much for joining us. Trevor's going to introduce his panelists, so they will be welcomed appropriately and gratefully. But the last thing I want to say is that in this work, your voice matters, and our constancy and commitment to this work matters. So thank you for showing up today. And I hope you'll show up with us as we continue this work in political action, in policy papers, and in advocacy to governments. Thank you. Over to you, Trevor.
Well, thank you, and good morning, everybody. I'm Trevor Hancock, and I am, like Shannon, here in the traditional and unceded territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people in Victoria, British Columbia. I'm happy to say we have over 100 people on this call already, and we have a couple of hundred registered, so we expect that to grow. I will just flag that initially we had a little bit of internal confusion, and we billed this as a 1-hour webinar, but it's actually 1.5 hours. If any of you are only planning for 1 hour, you will get to hear everything the speakers have to say, but you won't really get much of the discussion, which will happen in the final half hour. And we'll do that in plenary. We're not planning on breaking into small groups. But anyway, welcome. I would just share my screen because I want to run through some basic there we are. Okay, so as I said, this it says there 11 till 12. I took a screenshot earlier of the older blurb on advert on our website, but it's actually from 11 to 12:30 PST. The topic, as you see here, is a Wellbeing Society makes peace with nature. So I just want to make a few introductory remarks and then turn it over as quick as possible to our speakers. So Wellbeing Societies, you will recall, I hope, we're inspired by the WHO's Geneva Charter for Wellbeing, which talks about wellbeing societies committed to achieving equitable health now and for future generations. Interesting. Sorry
Is your
about that.
screen freezing?
No, no, I've got it.
Okay.
Um, so without breaching ecological limits, that's the key point. In the 5 areas for health promotion response that were outlined in the Geneva Charter, the very first one is value, respect, and nurture planet Earth and its ecosystems. Very interesting that WHO would put that right at the top of its areas of action for health promotion in the 21st century. This next document is something that Lindsay McLaren and I put together for the PHABC Summer Institute last June, the think piece that we have for all our summer institutes. And we took that definition, and out of that, we teased some key principles of a well-being society. And three of those pertain in particular to today's topic. First of all, make the well-being not only of all people, but all living things and the planet the central focus. Secondly, everything we do must be achieved within the Earth's planetary boundaries. And thirdly, this is going to require us to reimagine the system and process of governance. So these are pretty hefty, weighty thoughts. The inspiration in particular for the theme of making peace with nature comes from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in his State of the Planet report 5.5 years ago now, where he said, on the one hand, that humanity is waging war on nature and that this is suicidal, and importantly, that making peace with nature is the defining task of the 21st century, the top priority for everyone, everywhere. So it is in that context that we're running today's webinar as a fundamental plank of a well-being society, a fundamental set of limits within which we have to live, and this whole notion of making peace with nature as opposed to waging war on nature. Not only do we wage war on each other, as we've seen recently, more so than usual, but we also wage war on nature. Two themes we're going to explore within this, and I will in a moment introduce our two speakers. The first is this: we behave in Canada as if we have all of this. 5.1, around 5 planets is our ecological footprint, an idea, incidentally, that has Canadian origins with Bill Rees and Matisse Wackenagel at UBC. So we have an ecological footprint of 5 planets. But the reality, of course, is that we only have the one planet. And so how do we live within one planet? That's one theme. And for that, we're going to have Cora Hallsworth talking with us. The second theme is, how do we recognize nature's rights, the rights of other species, the rights indeed of entire ecosystems? And is there something called ecocide? Is destruction of the natural living world a crime against humanity and against nature? And for that, Meghan Robinson is going to talk about recognizing nature's rights. So that is the the work we're doing there. And so now let me move on and introduce our speakers. And my apologies here, I've got this double screen thing going that is making it difficult for me to escape from there. There we go. Okay, so let me then turn to our two speakers, and I will very briefly introduce both of them. So Cora Hallsworth. Cora has 20 years experience at advancing community and organizational sustainability. She's worked on award-winning plans, has initiated numerous sustainability initiatives. I've known her for a number of years now through her work in particular as part of One Planet Saanich, which she coordinates, one of 5 model pilot projects from around the world. She's principal of her own consulting practice. She's also a part-time manager of the Eco City initiatives for the BC Institute of Technology's Center for Eco-Cities and is a senior associate with an NGO called One Earth. So she'll be talking about the One Planet living and One Planet communities and a One Planet society. Meghan Robinson, who comes to us from the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh unceded territories, with ancestry taking her back to County Mayo in Ireland. She's a doctoral candidate at the Interdisciplinary Studies graduate program at UBC. She's also the project specialist for Respect for All Relations, a community-driven collaboration and action research program at UBC. And she's working with the Center for Environment and Law at UBC. So she will talk to us about the rights of nature. But first, we'll begin with Cora.
Well, thanks so much, Trevor, and to the Public Health Association of BC for hosting this event. I'm really thrilled to be with you here today. Looking forward to sharing some information, or I hope to make the connection between sustainability, nature, and public health, focusing on the One Planet Living model, and hopefully focusing on some practical actions. So before I begin, I'd like to respectfully and gratefully acknowledge that I'm living on the land of the Lekwungen peoples, including the Kasapsum, Songhees nations, and the Wasanic peoples, represented by Sartlet, Pecouchian, Sayout, and Sekam, and Malahat nations. I have great gratitude that I have the opportunity to work, learn, and share ideas on these traditional territories. And the work we're talking about today is about long-term stewardship, and this is something that Indigenous communities have been leading for generations. Here's an overview of what I'd like to talk about. So I'll start with an overview of what One Planet Living is and why it matters. And then I'll provide a brief spotlight on the work we've been doing using the One Planet Living framework in Saanich, BC. Then I'll share some ideas on where the health sector can and already is leading. So at its core, One Planet Living is a vision where everyone everywhere is living happy and healthy lives within the limits of our planet. So this is about making a plan to be sustainable over the long term, where we can all live within the limits of what our planet can support, and doing so in ways that everyone everywhere has the opportunity to be happy and healthy. The 10 One Planet Living principles act as a guide. They're similar to a checklist, like the determinants of health. And these principles cover all aspects of social, environmental, and economic sustainability. They align with the Sustainable Development Goals, and they're simple and easy to communicate. And importantly, they put people first, starting, as you'll see, with health and happiness at the top. They're grounded also in the reality of how people live their lives, so people can connect with these principles directly. And they also emphasize the importance of leaving space for nature and restoring natural systems. So nature isn't just something that we protect. It's the foundation of all that supports us, our health, food systems, clean air, and climate stability. So ultimately, we can get to One Planet Living by creating communities and cities that are in balance with nature, but also making sure that everyone can meet their basic needs and live happy, healthy lives. When we talk about creating healthy communities, we also need to be talking about restoring and integrating nature, because human health depends on functioning natural systems. Nature isn't separate from health, it's foundational to it. So health systems are uniquely positioned to lead in this space. At the most fundamental level, health depends on healthy natural systems. And there's growing recognition that supporting nature is part of supporting long-term health and well-being. The same systems that shape environmental outcomes also shape health outcomes, which creates a powerful opportunity to address both at the same time. At its heart, this is prevention work. Healthcare organizations already do play a critical role through operations and, even more importantly, through their influence. As one of the most trusted sectors in society, you have the ability to lead by example, shape norms, and help support healthier choices across communities. Health systems are also anchor institutions. They're major employers, purchasers, and community hubs, which means your decisions can have far-reaching impact. There's already strong leadership emerging across the sector. I've seen lots of amazing initiatives, and so we can build and scale on these initiatives to expand impact. So I did want to kind of talk a little bit about the challenge that's in front of us that Trevor has noted as well. So we humans are using up to half of the Earth's biological and productivity to support our needs. And we have impacted the majority of Earth's land and oceans. In the past few years, scientists around the world are showing that we're bumping up against important planetary boundaries. So this chart here, developed by the Stockholm Resilience Center, shows these boundaries visually. So we're not dealing with just one issue. This is a interconnected system. And data shows that globally, we're already transgressing numerous critical boundaries like climate change, biodiversity loss, land use change, and the release of environmental pollutants. These are all impacting our health and the health of the planet. So these interconnected challenges require systems-based approach to action, and we need to have all sectors of society involved and contributing. And as we know in BC and across Canada, we're already seeing these impacts. Heat events are increasing mortality, wildfire smoke affecting respiratory and cardiovascular health, flooding and extreme weather is disrupting care systems, and air pollution is contributing to major chronic diseases. So food systems are also driving contributions to emissions and as well as diet-related illness. Loss of access to nature is also important and linked to worsening mental health, chronic disease, reduced resilience. So these aren't future risks anymore. These are current system pressures that we're experiencing. So the good news is that living within the limits of our planet means supporting well-being and thriving lives for all. Sustainability is more than just about focusing on the environment. It's about creating healthier, more balanced lives for everyone. And by making thoughtful choices that show care for the earth and for each other, we can focus more on truly on what truly matters, including health and belonging, shifting away from wasteful activities that do not serve us well. Healthy ecosystems are as foundational as housing, food, and income when it comes to supporting long-term health outcomes. So in addition to the planetary boundaries, a simple metric that Trevor had already noted is the ecological footprint. This was developed here in BC at UBC. And it's a simple way to show us how close we are to one planet living. We know how much productive area there is on the Earth, and we can divide that by the number of people on the planet to figure out what our fair share is. Also critically setting aside space for nature to regenerate and sustain biodiversity. So we know in BC and in Canada, we're using about 5 planets worth of resources to support our daily activities if everyone consumed at the same level we are doing. So this is also overshooting what the planet can provide. And so some of the numbers we have here based on BC, a typical community in BC, from the footprint perspective, food is driving nearly half of the footprint. Also important are transportation, buildings, and consumable goods or staff. So I'll be focusing on actions later in the presentation that we can take on these different categories. So essentially, to achieve one planet living, we'll need to shrink our impacts, share resources equitably, and regenerate environmental and social capital. Before I get into the healthcare sector opportunities, I wanted to provide a brief highlight of what we've done in Saanich using the One Planet Living framework. So Saanich was one of 6 global cities that participated in a One Planet Cities project led by Bioregional UK and in partnership with One Earth Living. So this initiative brings together community groups, schools, and businesses to create sustainability One Planet action plans using the One Planet Living framework. We use the One Planet Living principles and the ecological footprint and greenhouse gas emission metrics as a guide to help identify high impact opportunities to pursue. And organizations that got involved have led some amazing initiatives. The District of Saanich was the anchor organization, and they embedded One Planet Living into their award-winning climate action plan and their official community plan, and they support community organizations to undertake their own actions and develop their action plans. An organization called PHABC, which you might have heard about, is helping people get out in nature, and they here locally built a high-performing living building standard new facility, fully aligned with the One Planet Living principles. We have a church that launched an Eco Games challenge for their congregation, and an organization that is supporting reuse of goods through a creative reuse center. Lots of great developments. It's developers of constructed passive houses and zero car-free developments. And our schools, I wanted to highlight some of the amazing work of our schools, doing naturalization projects, circular economy initiatives, creating market gardens, selling these foods in the community, and stocking their own salad bars. So some amazing work going on across all the schools. So now over to healthcare sector. The healthcare sector has a unique opportunity to act on One Planet Living, and as I mentioned, already is, both in terms of internal operations and how it interacts with and supports the community. So I wanted to highlight 4 areas that have significant impact in terms of the footprint, but also can help contribute to the broad One Planet principles. So these 4 categories are reducing waste, shifting to plant-rich diets, creating healthy zero-carbon buildings, and transitioning to zero-carbon mobility. So on these, this slide shows the various principles and shows how these 4 action areas contribute directly to some of the principles, but indirectly to all of them. So these are really important cross-cutting strategies that can have a range of benefits. And these are very connected to the health system, very relevant to the health system. They show up directly in operations and care environments, in patient meals, procurement, nutrition guidance, in hospitals and facilities that are energy intensive and directly affect health outcomes through staff, commuting, patient access, fleet operations. And each of these areas also represents an opportunity to protect and restore nature. So starting with food waste, food is one of the most significant drivers of both greenhouse gas emissions and our ecological footprint. And within that, food waste is a major contributor. Food systems are one of the main ways we interact with and impact nature. In Canada, a large portion of food is wasted across the supply chain and use chain, including in institutions like hospitals and care facilities. When food is wasted, all the energy, water, land, and labor that went into producing it are also wasted. So reducing this waste has multiple co-benefits. In addition to lowering emissions and pollution, it improves the efficiency of food systems and lowers costs. It also creates opportunities to build food literacy. And importantly, it reduces unnecessary pressure on agricultural systems, helping to protect ecosystems and diversity. Alongside reducing food waste, shifting to more plant-rich diets is one of the highest impact opportunities we have. From a health perspective, diets rich in whole plant foods are associated with lower risk of heart disease, diabetes, and some cancers, as you all know. They can also support better overall nutrition and long-term health outcomes. From an environmental perspective, plant-based foods generally require significantly less land, water, and energy than animal-based foods and produce fewer greenhouse gas emissions. This means that even modest shifts in diet can have a meaningful impact. And we are by no means saying eliminating meat, but shifting to increasing contributions of plant-based foods. There's also affordability benefits, as diets centered on these staples can often can be the lowest cost ways to meet nutritional needs. There's also opportunities to strengthen community connections through local and culturally supported food systems. So lots of great co-benefits in acting in this space. And the healthcare sector is uniquely positioned to lead relating to food through operations and influence. And in fact, it already is, with numerous actions in this area that can be built upon and scaled. On the operations side, this could include opportunities around food procurement and menu design, making plant-based meals the default or prominent. Also an opportunity to embed sustainability criteria into procurement. This could also include prioritizing food that is produced using regenerative or biodiversity supporting agriculture. So this is techniques that actively restore soil health, biodiversity, and ecosystem function. Equally important is the role of patient education, which healthcare is already involved in. Healthcare providers are trusted sources of information, and integrating plant-based nutrition into prevention and care has broad impacts. So finally, healthcare facilities act as anchors in communities, partnering with local organizations to support food literacy and more sustainable food systems is a great opportunity space. So the next area is buildings. Buildings are another major source of emissions, and they also directly affect patient and staff well-being. Many facilities still rely on fossil fuels, particularly natural gas, for heating and hot water. Transitioning to zero carbon healthy buildings, primarily through electrification and energy use, can significantly reduce emissions, but many additional co-benefits can be achieved too. Eliminating on-site combustion improves indoor air quality by reducing exposure to harmful pollutants. In addition, there's opportunity to use healthier, low carbon and non-toxic materials in construction and renovation. Also, importantly, integrating nature into our built environments may contribute to faster recovery, reduce stress, and improve staff well-being. Buildings can either disconnect people from nature or intentionally reconnect them. And leadership opportunities in this space include the electrification, energy efficiency opportunities, shifting to renewables, integrating nature into building design, as I noted, and also focusing on resilience, including making sure that facilities are resilient to upcoming climate impacts, providing cooling, air filtration, and backup power to support operations during extreme events. And healthcare can also provide guidance to patients and community on health and efficiency opportunities for homes and workplaces, and advocate for improvements through government action. Transportation is another key area with strong connections to health. Active transportation, such as walking and cycling, improves physical and mental health and reduces air pollution. It also supports more connected and livable communities. Reducing reliance on private vehicles also helps reduce congestion, land use impacts, and environmental degradation. Shifting to electric vehicles is also critical to reduce harmful emissions. And there's also important benefits in terms of affordability and access. And ways that healthcare can lead in this space. So in numerous ways, transportation systems shape not just emissions, but how people experience and interact with nature daily, encouraging active commuting through among staff, through incentives and providing supporting infrastructure, providing charging stations, and transitioning fleet to electric vehicles. There's also roles in active community engagement. Healthcare providers can promote active travel and low carbon transportation through outreach and education. There's also opportunities to partner with municipalities to support safer walking and cycling infrastructure. As I noted, healthcare has already been active in many of these spaces, and lots of opportunities to scale and connect further with partners. In terms of resources, there are so many amazing resources out there to support this work. I know CAPE is on the call today. Lots of great resources from CAPE, the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, looking at how to shift away from a fossil fuel-based economy. There's also Nourish, which is a Canadian initiative that works specifically with healthcare institutions to advance food as a lever for planetary health and human health. You're probably familiar with this already. I also wanted to flag some of the resources we have from One Earth Living. We've developed numerous guides on advancing sustainable lifestyles. We have the Live Net Zero challenge that we've been hosting and look forward to running again this year. And I wanted to specifically highlight one new resource that we've just developed, and this is a guide to support seniors' home facilities. And I know Island Health runs a lot of these health facilities. So this could be particularly relevant to your work. contains a range of actions that are aligned with the One Planet Living principles. And we've created 6 action packs, which are focusing on actions, many of the actions that I shared today in this presentation. So you'll find operational actions and resident engagement actions all aligned with the principles. There's also case studies on what some facilities have already undertaken. So I can share the links for these resources at the end of the presentation as well. So to close, One Planet Living is fundamentally aligned with public health priorities. At its core, health depends on restoring and working within nature. Human health isn't separate from the natural world, but rather it's shaped by it. And the air we breathe, the food we eat, the water we rely on, and the stability of our climate all depend on healthy functioning ecosystems. This is central to healthcare. It's about prevention at a systems level, addressing the root causes of many of the health challenges we're seeing today, including chronic disease, inequities, and growing pressures on our health system. The actions we've discussed across food, buildings, and transportation aren't just environmental actions, they're practical ways to create healthier environments, support better outcomes for patients and communities, and reduce long-term strain on the health system. There's already strong momentum, and many organizations are taking meaningful steps, and there's growing recognition that this work matters. So the opportunity now is to build on that momentum, scale and integrate this work across the health system, and to embed it in how we plan, deliver, and think about care. Because ultimately, creating a One Planet community is about creating the conditions for people and communities to thrive now and into the future. So thank you. Look forward to our discussion as well.
Cora, thank you very much. That was, as you can see from the showers of applause there, much appreciated. I think in particular, the key message here from a public health point of view, of course, is that what we do in the healthcare system or in the health sector more broadly affects the community and vice versa, that we can both model behaviors and policies and activities as institutions for the community, and we can learn from the community and bring that in-house. So it's that combination that's so important. How we become one planet. Some of you may know I wrote a piece a couple of years ago for Healthcare Management Forum about becoming a one planet health system. How do you reduce the ecological footprint of the health system as part of reducing the ecological footprint of the community and society as a whole? So that is the first part of our discussion about making peace with nature. Making peace with nature means living within the limits of the earth and adjusting our society to do so. Another powerful way to think about this, I'm sorry, I should just, before I move on to Meghan, while talking about the public health system, I should have noted at the beginning, and I will do so now, that this is Canadian Public Health Week. So we wanted to have this session within Canadian Public Health Week, and we are partnering with the Canadian Public Health Association as part of this. So this is why we have perhaps a larger and more East Coast audience than we've had in the past, but we will be hopefully continuing that partnership. I'll tell you at the end about the webinar we have planned for the next session next month or maybe in early June, but I'll come back to that. Meanwhile, I'd like to turn to Meghan, and Meghan is going to talk to us about another vital part of making peace with nature, which is recognizing the rights of nature. So Meghan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Trevor, and thank you everyone for coming to this webinar and for all that you do for us in public health. Without you, we would be nothing. So it's really wonderful to get a chance to talk to you today. So Cheryl is going to control my slides. I'll just get them up here. So just to begin, I am lucky enough to work and learn on the unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, but my ancestry takes me back to County Mayo, Ireland. So my PhD is focused on anthropology and law. I've been working with the Maori in Aotearoa, New Zealand for over 12 years now. And so a lot of this presentation is going to be based on my learning from there. However, you're probably going to wonder in these first couple slides, what does this have to do with you and being in Canada? But I promise I will get there. So next slide here. I actually just got back from Aotearoa, New Zealand with a group of 35 Indigenous knowledge holders, elders, and community members from Wisanich, the Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance, Haida, and Tsilhqot'in, going to the different iwi or tribes who have legal personhood in Aotearoa, looking at whether that is something that could be possible in those particular territories. So I'm going to begin just by describing a little bit about Maori tikanga, which is Maori law. And again, I promise I will get to the health part of this, but the reason why this is so important is because it's all very much interconnected. So the foundational aspects of tikanga are these core concepts here. So we have manakitanga, which is care, generosity. We have whakapapa, which is their genealogical connection to the atua, which are their environmental deities that make up every aspect of the environment. We have aroha, love, tapu and noa, which is the balance between the sacred and the neutral, so spiritual aspects of law. Then we have tino rangatiratanga, sovereignty of Maori people and also of the landscapes of Aotearoa. And then we have kaitiakitanga, environmental stewardship, and balance, utu. So balance between the environment and people, balance between men and women, balance between everything that exists within the world. Next slide. So I'm going to start with a really important example of kind of connecting health, environment, and the law. So here we have harakeke, which is a really important plant for Maori. It was when settlers came over in the 1800s, they described it as flax, but it actually comes from an entirely different family, but we would know it as flax here. So this plant is used for pretty much everything. So they use it for weaving. You can eat it. It's very similar to how the cedar is treated here in British Columbia, but obviously like a smaller plant. But it's a really beautiful symbol in Maori community because on the inside, the most precious and smallest part of the harakeke is known as the rito, is the child. And then from out there is the afi rito, or the parents that protect the child. And then the parts of the flax that are starting to get older, starting to droop, are the tupuna, the grandparents. And from that symbolism and that metaphor was how they took care of this plant and made sure that there was a sustainability practice around that. And from that came their tikanga, came the right way of doing things. So for example, they would never cut harakeke when it was raining, because they knew that that would destroy it. They would only cut the tupuna. They would never cut the rito or the afi rito, because that would protect the plant. They would never cut it at night. And women who were in their moon time also couldn't cut it because it was kind of a difficult process. It's quite a difficult plant to try and cut. So it was a way of sort of protecting women during this time. And a really interesting thing of looking at Indigenous legal revitalization is this new program that they are just setting up in Aotearoa called Te Rito Te Harakeke, so decolonizing child protection law in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So they're basing this particular legislation off of Maori tikanga, off of their way of understanding the harakeke plant. And that's because health inequities remain very pervasive in Aotearoa for Maori children. So that includes much higher hospitalization rates for Maori. And then also 33% of Maori children live below the poverty line. So there's a huge problem in Aotearoa, just like here in Canada, with racism and these issues around our law, and then also connecting to our health. Next slide. So this is the work that I am really focused on, and how we kind of connect this to the health here in Canada and to Canada. So areas where colonization exists, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, America, the state brought with it a certain way of understanding the world. There was a superiority that came over from the common law countries of Britain, that made its way to these particular landscapes. And also there was a legal order that was brought over that was completely different from Maori or from Indigenous peoples here in Canada. So it was based on the idea of the state, of a secular legal order, so no chance of spirituality, which is foundational to Maori law, to Indigenous legal orders here in Canada, and also a lot of patriarchy, so not recognizing women as being an integral aspect or an integral legal authority. And so from this, there was a fragmentation from land, from language, from their cosmology. And because of that, and the disconnection between land and people, came huge health impacts. Not only, I mean, here in Canada, we obviously know about the issues around smallpox. Exactly the same thing happened in Aotearoa, New Zealand. In the early 19th century, the Maori population dropped from 200,000 to 35,000. So it was because of illness. And so we see these patterns of poor health emerge between these places where the state has come, the colonial state, and these particular ways of understanding the world. And it's not, it's a consequence of this difference in understanding and this way of seeing the world that saw the earth as property, as nothing other than a natural resource, as opposed to seeing the earth and all of its, and things like the harakeke, as whakapapa, as part of the genealogy or our kin. So there are some Maori who can actually, based on their whakapapa or genealogy, they can go back in their ancestral line and connect all the way directly to Mother Earth, to Earth Mother, which is an incredible connection and kin way of understanding the world that is very different from the way that the state came and understood the idea of property and natural resources. So from that understanding, there comes a responsibility, an obligation to these places, and an understanding that if you protect the health of this place, then your health will also be part of that. And so comes the concept of ecocide. So ecocide is understood as the large-scale destruction of ecosystems that should be recognized as a crime. So cultural genocide that came from the state and from colonization is recognized. It's recognized in our law, whereas ecocide is not necessarily yet recognized. So it was actually coined by the American botanist Arthur Gladstone. And so the idea is that legal personhood, which I'll go into, says that a river or a natural entity could be represented in court. And ecocide is the idea that a person who destroys a natural entity could be prosecuted for that. So these two things go hand in hand. And a really interesting aspect of this sort of systemic impacts of colonization, which connects Maori and Indigenous peoples here in Canada, are some pretty stark statistics. So as of 2023, Maori make up 17.8% of the population in Aotearoa, and yet Maori have a higher mortality rate. Maori children have higher rates of illness. Maori die 8 to 10 years earlier than non-Maori, and Maori women face higher rates of breast cancer, cervical cancer, and lung cancer, as well as hugely much greater rates of obesity. It's twice as high as those in non-Maori. And here in Canada, we see that as of 2021, Indigenous peoples make up 5% of the population. And yet infant mortality is 3 times higher for Indigenous peoples here in Canada. For First Nations here in BC, the life expectancy is 67 compared to 82 for non-Indigenous peoples. And most strikingly, in 2024, 1 in 5 Indigenous respondents reported experiencing discrimination and racism in healthcare settings. So this is an impact of a system that is completely divergent and from the ways of thinking from other populations and other cultures. And so it's how we come together as two very different cultures, one that understands the environment and spirituality and our connection to those completely differently, and in complete opposition to another. Next slide. So this is connecting back to rights of nature versus rights of health. So the health of Maori Indigenous rights is integral to the rights of the Maori Nation. So this is where we now come into the rights conversation. So next slide. So legal personhood and rights of nature, this concept is a very exciting, new, burgeoning field of law that's kind of taken the world by storm. So legal personhood is the idea that natural entities are granted the same rights, duties, and obligations as a person. So we first saw the rights of nature in 2008 in the Ecuadorian Constitution. And so, and then in 2010, we have Bolivia with the Vivir Bien, living well with nature, also wrote it into their laws. So the Bolivia Law of the Rights of Mother Earth. And then in 2014, Aotearoa, New Zealand became the first country in the world to grant legal personhood to a natural entity. So Te Urewera was a national park, so it already had the highest level of protection in New Zealand. But one big thing and that I've learned through this research is that for Maori and for New Zealand, like rights of nature has been very much a concept around environmental protection and environmental rights. But in Maori, it wasn't about that. It was an ownership issue. So the Crown was totally unwilling to give ownership back to Maori of their land. And they had been in court for over 100 years with the Crown over ownership. So then one of the leading lawyers in New Zealand, John Wood, he came up with this idea, well, what if rather than the Crown owning it or Maori owning it, what if it just owns itself? What if no one owns it? And so it wasn't like exactly a win for Maori, but it was a concept that would bring the Crown closer in towards a Maori way of understanding the world. And so from this, you have a guardian program that is half Pakeha or non-Indigenous, and then a guardian, and part of it is Maori as well. So it is all around co-governance between different ways of seeing the world. So from that, you have something in the Te Urewera Act called the Te Kawa o Te Urewera, which is the laws around this particular forest. So Te Kawa is the laws. And there's a really beautiful quote from Te Kawa, which is, for all implementing the new Te Urewera Act and Te Kawa will involve a process of unlearning, rediscovery, and relearning to seize the truth expressed by our beliefs. So this is the really big aspect of rights of nature and legal personhood, is this idea that it's starting to move non-Indigenous peoples towards a different way of understanding the world that is more in relation with Maori ways of understanding the world. And so then you have Te Awa Tupua Act, which one of the very first sentences in this legislation is Ko au te awa ko au, which is I am the river and the river is me. So it's this idea that if the river is unwell, I will also be unwell because the river is my ancestor and I have a spiritual and kin relationship to that place and to the river. So that is the foundation of Maori law. And so health is integral to law. Health is integral to the environment. And the two cannot be disconnected, or the three, I guess, law, people, and place. They cannot be disconnected from each other because they're all completely interrelated, not only from like a genetic perspective, but also from a spiritual perspective. So we actually have two cases of legal personhood here in Canada. So first in 2021, there's the Magpie River, which is in Innu territory in Quebec, was the first place in Canada to be granted legal personhood. And very excitingly, just last month, the Yukon Ross River Dene Council gave personhood or rights to the caribou herd, the fin-listening caribou herd. So they can actually be protected in court because the caribou are such an integral part of this particular First Nations spirituality, and also to their laws and to their health. Next slide, please. So a lot of my work then goes to, so what are our obligations, responsibilities as settlers? What does this mean for us who exist within this sort of state or common law perspective and have been raised in this particular way of understanding the world? And for me, it's about reconnecting to our own ancestral connections and our own ancestral laws, so that we can understand that our own identity comes from these particular places. So there's a saying in Ireland, I saw that there's someone here from Ireland, that's called Enam Cara, so the soul friend. So each of us identifies back to an environment, and recognizing that the idea that we are all connected through to an environmental place is actually more common in the world than this idea that the environment is just a natural resource, the environment is a property. So recognizing that most ancestral legal orders connect us to a place, and reconnecting to those places, no matter how far the diaspora has taken us, will allow us to understand the environment differently in a way that is more about our responsibility and our to not only to those places, but also to the first laws of the place that we exist on now. So we have an obligation to learning and understanding the first laws of place that exist in the places that we settle. And also recognizing that there is an intrinsic connection between health, culture, and environment that has been protected in these lands for millennia. And so what does that mean? Does that mean that because we connect to our own ancestral stories, that we then have a greater respect for the stories and the laws of the places that we now settle? So what does that mean for health and for public health, for law? Does it mean recognizing the earth and different territories as a research partner, as a lawmaker, as a health provider? And what does it mean to bring the natural world into these conversations, and to have the natural world teach us more than we think that it can? So those are kind of the questions that I've been asking in my research and around this work, particularly around how can we start to recognize that the health of a place is intimately connected to our own health, and reconnecting to this from different ways of understanding the world and different cultures around the world. Thank you very much.
Meghan, thank you very much. And as you can see, much appreciated. That final point, I just want to make a quick connection here that occurs to me, and has occurred to me before listening to this, that also connects both of your talks, I think, and that is the idea of watersheds. And we've talked here in the Greater Victoria region, and Cora has been part of these conversations, of course, that One Planet Living in part means relating to our bioregion, taking a bioregional approach to the places we live, which is, in a sense, very much what you were talking about, that sense of connection to place, the culture and the place. And in public health, of course, we're quite concerned about watersheds because of water treatment and water quality and water supply and all of that. So how do these kind of ideas change the way that public health relates to watersheds and to watershed protection and the way we go about doing that? I think there's all kinds of interesting implications in that. What if our watersheds were persons? And what if we treated them that way? How would that change the way we did urban planning, we did in land management and all the rest of it. Thank you both for really interesting, challenging presentations, for laying out a set of issues that I hope we can have some discussion about. The way I suggest we go about discussion is, if you've got a question, I would encourage you to use the reaction button and put your hand up, and we'll take the questions in the order they come. Or whether it's a question or a comment or a point you want to make. And of course, you can also use the chat. While you're thinking about that, let me just make a couple of quick points about some of the things that are going on that relate to this. One is that on June 15th, a group of senators led by Senator Rosa Galvez are going to be doing a Planetary Health Day on Parliament Hill for parliamentarians. It's an invitation-only event. However, they are intending to live stream it, and so we will distribute the link to that once we have it. I haven't yet got it from the organizers, so that people across the country can watch this event. You will be interested in it in particular because the keynote speaker is going to be Johan Rockström, and Johan Rockström has been the lead person, along with Will Stephan and a few others, around the whole work around planetary boundaries. So Johan Rockström is going to be doing a keynote presentation around planetary boundaries for Canada's parliamentarians. And it's the start of what I hope will be a series of events raising this issue within the Senate and the House of Commons. There'll also be a panel following Johan Rockström's presentation, moderated by Courtney Howard, who many of you will know of, and featuring Victoria Hirth, who is a business expert in sustainability from England, and Nicole Redvers, who many of you will know, who is a leading Indigenous health, planetary health leader here in Canada. So I think you'll enjoy that, and we will once we have it, we'll send the link out to the live stream to all of the people on this call or who responded. That's one thing. Second thing is, I'm involved in some work with a few other folks. The Federal Sustainable Development Strategy there's a draft Federal Sustainable Development Strategy out. You may want to take a look at it. It is to my mind, remarkably deficient in what it does. And it's open for comment until May 12th. I'm working with some folks from the Wellbeing Economy Alliance of Canada and Eco-Justice and others to respond to that. It'll be actually the topic of my column in the next couple of columns here in the Times Colonist. But for example, this Federal Sustainable Development Strategy, the word Earth doesn't appear at all in the 74-page, 22,000-word document. The word planet appears once. There's no reference to the ecological footprint, no reference to planetary boundaries. It's quite astonishing that they would talk about sustainable development in the 21st century and not mention any of that, never mind the more profound issues that Meghan's been raising around our relationship with nature. So you may want to take a look at that, because we need a lot of pushback on that. And the third thing is the issue that Cora was talking about, particularly around what some people are calling the planetary health diet. Health Officers Council, I'm on the Planetary Health Committee for BC, and we're doing a session at the next meeting in May, specifically on the Eat Lancet report on sustainable diets, healthy sustainable diets, and the notion of a planetary health diet. And so popularizing that as the way we should be going, the plant-based diet. It's basically, what's his name? I'm always having a blank. Who was it that said eat food, mostly plants, not too much?
Michael Pollan, isn't it?
There you are, Michael Pollan. Would make a great national food and agriculture policy. Eat food, mostly plants, not too much. But anyway, something we can model. Okay. So that's given you also a chance to put your thoughts together, folks. And I'm going to turn to Doug Koremanch first of all.
Thank you, Trevor. Thank you, Kara and Megan. That was a wonderful pair of presentations. It kind of talks about the need for us to restore what we would call the kinship worldview. And there's two issues. One is the conflict between biology and technology, the biosphere and the technosphere. So even in the sort of net zero and zero carbon world, there's still technology and there's still the sort of pollution and toxic side effects of that. So that's something we need to figure out how to address. And then the second thing, which I'm interested in comments on, is the sort of biocultural war that we live with. Like when our biological imperative is to behave one way, but our culture tells us to do something else, and so we're all in a bit of moral distress. And as an example, I had an interesting conversation with one of my anesthesiology colleagues the other day who was talking about traveling and international travel. And that's a huge carbon footprint, but it's like some people seem to be addicted to it. And I'm wondering how the people in Saanich, if they've given up international traveling, for example, as part of your program. And then my question for Meghan was, the Allard School of Law has 2 publications on rights of nature of their proposed series of 5, and I'm wondering if you know what's happening with the other 3, if they'll be coming out. It's a really good review. Thank you.
So, Cora.
Yeah, that was some big questions there. So yes, I agree. And no, people are still definitely flying. So that is definitely one area that we need to focus in on. I'm personally kind of happy that the flight costs are going up. That's definitely one way. We're not pricing things properly. So the things that are damaging the planet are cheaper than they should be, and things that are contributing to our health and well-being are too expensive in a lot of ways. So shifting the financial indicators on that is one great way. Getting down to the bottom of that, pricing fossil fuel accordingly, so that people can choose more sustainable choices more easily, more readily. So I think that that's a huge thing that we need to see from our governments. Now, I know it's going in the wrong direction currently, but whatever we can do to leverage that or support that and advocate for that, which I know CAPE has been doing fabulous work on. So thank you for CAPE for doing that. And then the conflict between technology and a lot of the impact that's coming from technology. I think there's also ways that technology can help. I mean, there was one question in the chat about supporting remote working. It's all, there's pros and cons with every new development though. So it's basically a systems problem. And I think getting down to the root of it, whatever we can do to get off of fossil fuels will help solve the greatest number of challenges. And in the response to the question about how much working from home is going to benefit by reducing greenhouse gas emissions from transport, I think a better solution is really focusing on how to improve our transportation systems. So making active transportation more accessible, increasing transit and not diesel-based buses, electric buses, making sure we're getting those, focusing in those areas. And I wanted to also say, I should have said this more in the presentation. I want to thank everyone here that's doing all this amazing work. I presented a lot of ideas, and I know many of you are already doing a lot of work in this space. So I wanted to thank you for all of the work that you're already doing to advance a lot of these ideas.
Thank you. And Meghan.
Yeah, I'll speak first a little bit to the question around sort of flying. And I do take issue with this idea that we have sort of this individual responsibility to not use plastic straws or not fly. And yet we have our federal government putting through projects of national interest that are based on extraction, that are taking away Indigenous jurisdiction, and that are being funded by American and Canadian military projects as well as private companies. So I think that we really have to put the onus less so on the individual and more so on our government, on the corporations, because they're the ones that are making the biggest impact. And I mean, even so, example, yes, we had a huge carbon footprint flying 35 of us over to Aotearoa, New Zealand. And yet the conversations and the lifelong relationships that are formed from those kinds of experiences are going to have much more impact. And so I think we really have to get away from this. I think putting it onto the individual and the onus on the individual takes away from sort of this community idea and from the responsibility that our governments have in the priorities that they need to be taking on. And in terms of the rights of nature, so that's actually my PhD supervisor, Stephen Wood, who was leading this Aotearoa New Zealand trip. Yeah, so we have our RAs working on those programs, so I will tell him that we need to hurry it up. But they should. So I will more than happy to get your email, and as soon as they're out, I can email them to you. So
thank you. And just I'm going to come on into in a minute, Richard, but there is a question in the chat that I will just turn to for a moment. But also just in response to that question around commuting and working from home, for those of you who live here in Victoria, there is an interesting opinion piece in the Times Colonist yesterday or the day before from Dallas Geslerson, who's with the South Island Prosperity Partnership. And he was arguing about the social and intellectual and organizational benefits of coming into work, of being together, of the mentorship and the training and the learning and the companionship and all the other social benefits of being in the workplace as opposed to isolated at home. So I think we have to factor all of that in as well. And I like Cora's response, which is, yeah, come into the office, but let's find better ways to get you there that don't involve a single person driving in a fossil fuel car. Okay, so Devon has a question in the chat. Is there any advocacy being done with the BC government to incorporate the One Planet framework into policy and legislation and to allocate funding to improving food systems, buildings and transportation across the system? Cora, let me turn to you on that, because the work you do with the BCIT Centre and the other work you do very much relates to that, I think. But we might also want to think about how does public health become part of that effort?
Right. Yeah. So, well, first acknowledging a lot of the work is backsliding. We've noted the cuts to the healthcare system, but cuts across the board on environmental support as well. So advocacy for provincial and federal government is definitely needed. And I believe that is strongly happening, especially from the municipal governments that I work with. They're always putting in resolutions to help shift things that need to be shifted that go up to the provincial government. So more support in working there. I think all the work, as I've already noted, the work that CAPE is doing and all of the Food Network group work as well. I think the advocacy there is very strong. And there's the ban oil initiative, banning oil development initiative as well. So I'm seeing lots of advocacy, and hopefully we can all collectively be more effective at shifting some of these provincial and federal policies that are just going in the wrong direction. So we have to stay strong together and keep up the good fight, I think.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I would add to that is I think we actually need to move beyond the sectoral policies piece to talk about how do you make one planet living or well-being, and I would really kind of equate those two. If you notice, incidentally, the first three principles of the 10 principles of one planet living are actually about health and happiness, equity, and about community. So they're not about the natural environment, they're actually about the social environment, and people's health and well-being is the very first principle. So how do you tie those together, and how do you make well-being the center of governance, well-being of the planet and well-being of people? And in fact, that is the topic of our next webinar, which will be in late May or early June, probably early June. We're still negotiating a bit about this, and I'll come back to it. But next webinar is going to be on a Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And we're going to be bringing in the Deputy Director of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Commissioner in Wales, where they actually have an act and a commissioner focused on that. So that'll be the focus in a month or 6 weeks' time, to a bit more than that, maybe, to our next webinar. Okay, Meghan, anything to add to that, or should I go to Richard? Okay, Richard.
Thanks, Trevor. I just wanted to say, I did speak to Toronto City Council this week, and one of the things I recommended to them is that they encourage the uptake of solar panels. That means that they're burning less and taking up more energy from the sun, and then back it up with battery backup, which is the price of batteries, as pointed out by Bill McKibben, has gone down by 97% in the last decade. And the sooner we start doing that, the better. The other thing I recommended to the Toronto City Council is that they start to explore electrifying their entire bus fleet. Just imagine what that would do for our planet. And just like we have already done in Ottawa, we've already elected in Ottawa to move towards electric buses over the next few years. Toronto and multiple other cities in Canada should start to move that direction. And then if you encourage people to take buses, and electric buses, be it that even better for the planet.
Absolutely. Cora, anything to add to that?
No, yeah, great suggestions and work that you're doing there, Richard. Thank you.
One other thing I suggested is that in my chat, I don't know if any of you saw it, is that there should be a surcharge on vehicles that are internal combustion engine. And that has already been adopted in some jurisdictions in the US and other jurisdictions around the world. And I have further information on that for anybody who's interested.
Great, thank you. Richard is a key member of our Canadian Coalition for Planetary Health and a Wellbeing Society, as is Shannon, who is the next person with a comment or question. And for those of you who may not have been here at the beginning, Shannon is the Executive Director of the Public Health Association of BC, which is the organizer and sponsor of these webinars, and also playing a key role in supporting the Canadian Coalition for Planetary Health and a Wellbeing Society. So thank you, Shannon.
Oh, thanks, T. It's a privilege to be able to engage in this work. It's part of our mission and advocacy. I did have a couple of reflections. I will say that it does my heart so good to see these incredible young women and their vision and their clarity, the policy frameworks and the approaches that they are espousing. It's hopeful. It's deeply hopeful to me. So thank you both. I did want to mention we've done quite a bit of work on commercial determinants of health and looking at commercial actors, both as health harming or health promoting. I think this is really relevant to our discourse, especially as it relates to ecocide, implications for Indigenous rights and the rights of nature. So I think that's an area, and that's an area that PHABC is quite committed to continuing action, especially looking at core competencies in partnership with a variety of thought leaders. And I think that discourse needs to be elevated as a mechanism for addressing government policy, especially around some of the work that's happening with fossil fuels in this country. We are also really concerned through the Planetary Health Coalition about the lack of emphasis on the environment and on well-being, even though there's supposed to be a cabinet leadership role related to Wellbeing Society. And so we're going to be putting together a position paper policy review that we hope will have some impact on decision making. I really appreciated what Cora said about the current fiscal environment and the devastation of the not-for-profit sector and the health sector, in particular public health and prevention. De-investment has occurred across many of the health authorities. And we've seen a number of not-for-profits who typically are very active in civil society and in public health issues, especially related to equity and inclusion, being negatively impacted by these cuts. So there's a range of assaults occurring that are systemic in nature, that mean that our voices only need to become more vigilant. And our commitment today and your participation today is very helpful, because we obviously will need to push back and push back hard around some of the directions that are being taken. I was in a conversation the other day with a global organization that does a lot of work around equity globally. We're not seeing the same kinds of commitment through global affairs, through Canadian global affairs, for some of the health impacts and equity impacts that were experienced by lower middle income countries related to shifts in economy and the tariffs, et cetera. So things like the de-investment in USAID, et cetera. So many of these very significant global challenges, the outbreak of war internationally, the impacts of tariffs, all of these challenges mean that we're very vulnerable economically. And that means that decisions can be taken that are harmful policies. And we are in the window of that. And so I think it's going to be vital for this conversation to extend. And finally, I just want to say that it brings me profound I'm just deeply happy that the energies of the plants and the trees and the water, the natural world, are finally being acknowledged and respected in this discourse. It's so overdue, and it's deeply hopeful. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. And I'm Cora or Meghan, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to say in response to that. Meghan liked it. I'm just going to turn quickly to the chat, and then I'll probably make some wrap-up comments unless there are other questions. In the chat, Ben asked specifically about how Saanich is reconciling its lack of protection for endangered ecosystems, particularly the Garry Oak Meadows, which are both ecologically and culturally significant to local First Nations. Now, I should say, and I'm sure she would say herself, that Cora does not represent Saanich and doesn't work for Saanich, so she's not speaking for Saanich, but she might have some thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for that, Trevor. So this is a hot topic in Saanich. There's densification work underway, and some of that densification work is resulting in the loss of some trees. So all of this, I mean, as I mentioned before, it's all systems where we have to balance the good and the bad. And I know that loss of some trees is definitely something we want to avoid. But there's also that equal pull in terms of providing housing and providing multifamily housing that's sorely needed in the region. And I think their OCP, the Saanich OCP, and the area plans that they've started to build, the new ones, it's really showing how careful densification with protecting natural spaces. Well, if you do densification, you can provide more space for nature and other locations. So I think that is where they're trying to focus, like make sure we can protect larger areas of nature rather than continuing to sprawl out, building within where what we already have. So definitely, and as Trevor said, I don't speak for Saanich, but that's my take on it.
Yeah, if I could respond, thank you, Cora. I totally respect that need to balance, density and development with and the of course the housing crisis with the ecosystem and balancing that respect for nature. Um, and I'm just this is a comment, not a criticism in any way. The term "some trees" is reflective of a perspective that might not consider the entire ecosystem, and I don't hope you don't take that as a criticism, but it's just an interesting piece of the semantics we use when we're talking about these issues, is that it's not some trees, it is a whole ecosystem, which historically on this Gary Oak ecosystems are inclusive and dependent upon human interaction. So that's another aspect of this respecting natural systems component, is integrating the human experience and the human role in all of these ecosystems and how they've been historically symbiotic. So those are two aspects that I'd just like to bring out to the conversation. Again, Cora, thank you. I do appreciate that there's a balance for all of these things.
Well, and personally, what I would like to see more is more protection of the corridors. We do have some corridors, but they're not strong enough. We need to kind of take over some of the areas that currently have homes in them so that we can enable corridors of wildlife corridor and have more trees. Like we don't want less trees in our community. We want more trees, and making sure there's continuous corridors and spaces for nature. So hopefully in future developments, every development has that in mind, that we need to, and sorry for saying some trees, I know it's a lot more than just some trees, but whatever development we do, I'd like to see more trees planted and focused on making intact habitat as well. And linking it with transportation corridors for people, for active transportation as well. There's so many opportunities. I've seen some developments go in that close off corridors for people to travel on, and that's not good either. We need to make sure we can have people moving freely by active transportation and integrate that with nature as well.
And it also speaks to the point Meghan was making about the, as you said, Ben, the cultural as well as the ecological dimensions of these Garry Oak meadows. For those of you folks who are not from southern Vancouver Island, Garry Oak meadows are rare ecosystems here now that have been decimated because they were exactly where the city grew. And this is the northern fringe of the distribution, but they're culturally important as food sources. They're associated with camas lily meadows that provide roots that are nutritious and a staple food, and so on. So there's a lot of cultural relationships embodied in all that. And then, of course, you have the struggle between that, and the last thing we want is more urban sprawl. So if you don't build out, you have to build not necessarily up, but smarter, more dense, but smart. And one of the problems is it's not sprawl or towers. It's what's a more dense, middle density, middle height living. Go to Copenhagen and look at how they do it, for example, where you don't have lots of high rises, but a fairly dense city with a lot of nature. So, yeah, a big issue. Thank you. Meghan, did you want to add anything?
I was just going to say about that in terms of one of the really interesting things when we went to Te Urewera was our group noticed how exactly that, like everything was on such a smaller scale. So the houses were smaller, the cars were smaller. People just needed less, and because they knew that the environment needed more. And I feel like, especially on Vancouver Island, when you go to Langford, it's quite sad because it seems like everything is about more and more and more. So and also understanding that these places have had human interaction for millennia. So it's not just necessarily about protection of the Garry Oak, but reestablishing the relationships with the camas and with the Garry Oak that have created a sustainable and relational experience between people and place. And that's one of the aspects where legal personhood comes in. If there is legal personhood for the Garry Oak, how is that going to change people's relationships to it? But again, that there are communities that have no interest in bringing in rights of nature or legal personhood because rights comes from a Western state perspective and way of seeing the world that is completely sort of oppositional to responsibilities. So that's an interesting way of thinking about it as well.
And I like the cultural shift there. We should maybe take that as a slogan, Meghan, which is people use less because they know the environment needs more. I could live with that. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Couple of thoughts in wrapping up. There was a very interesting side conversation, if you noticed in the chat, between Alex and Meghan about having babies. And I would just comment, as I do when this all comes up, that when you look at the ecological footprint of a child born in Canada and the ecological footprint of a child born in a low-income country, they're hugely different. So the implications of that are apparent, and that also we know from lots of experience and research that the way that you reduce family size in low-income countries is through development and through, in particular, the education and liberation and engagement of women. And so those countries need development. So when we talk about our fair share of the ecological footprint, if we have an ecological footprint of 5 planets and our fair share is 1 planet, that's an 80% reduction we need to make in our ecological footprint, which is huge. Now, 2/3 of that footprint, the way the footprint is measured, is carbon, roughly speaking. So if we can get to a zero carbon society, that takes care of a good chunk of that ecological footprint reduction. But at the same time, what it also means is countries that have a footprint of less than 1 planet, say 1/10 of a planet, they actually need economic development and resource development and all the rest of it. So we need to get that balance right. So maybe in addition to what Meghan said, people with a lot use less because they know that people with not much need more. We could add that into the sloganeering. It's the inherent politician in me. The other thing I just want to comment on that struck me was Cora talked about taxation. And interestingly enough, something I've been thinking about a lot recently. There's a principle in green politics that says you tax the things you don't want and you don't tax the things you do want. So, for example, if you want people to earn an income, don't tax it. If you don't want people to consume, then tax the consumption. So the implications of this for thinking about taxation reform are very interesting. And finally, I would just point, and so that may be something we'll explore in a future webinar, because there's also issues of redistribution through taxation and so on. We've just been talking this week to the, what do they call themselves? Patriotic Millionaires Canada, which is a group of millionaires that have come together to advocate for higher wealth taxes, higher income taxes, higher redistribution. And remember, in the donut economy, the 2 underlying principles of a donut economy that Kate Raworth proposes are an economy that is distributive and regenerative. So how do you get economic policy, including taxation policy, that distributes fairly and also that regenerates nature in the process? So some very interesting issues we might explore later, Shannon, about that. And finally, just to pick up on something Shannon commented, if you look at if you want to understand where the Carney government is coming from, to get a little political for a moment, they identified 7 priorities in his mandate letter to cabinet. What was it, 18 months ago now, whenever it was, identified 7 priorities. None of them was the environment, not one. And in fact, the word environment doesn't appear at all in his mandate letter to his cabinet. That tells you where the government's coming from on this. And that's why you don't find effective sustainable development strategies being proposed either. So we've got a lot of work to do, but recognizing that we all live on one planet and recognizing the cultural and spiritual dimensions of all of this is going to help us get there. So thank you to our speakers. Thank you to all of you for being here. This was, I think, the largest audience we've had, which is a testament to our speakers and to our topic. And we will see you, I hope, when our next webinar is. We will be announcing it as soon as we get the final details sorted out. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Trevor. Thank you, Meghan. Thank you, Cora. What a brilliant, engaging, and hopeful session. So much to consider. And I really appreciate the support that we've had for this series and support from the Public Health Agency of Canada around this dialogue over the last year. More good things to come in this work. And now that we have all your emails, we will be following up with you. So have a great day. Thank you. God bless.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Bye-bye.